Discipline versus freedom. Are they mutually exclusive concepts? And what even is freedom? Why are we trying to avoid discipline? Why are we trying to avoid achieving our goals, changing our lives for the better, when what we want to achieve is freedom and fulfillment and happiness? So I think we have to start with the definition of freedom, right? What does freedom mean to us? For the longest time, my definition of freedom was doing whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, and however I wanted. And I think that's the definition of freedom most of us have. And I think that very definition of freedom is what is keeping us away from freedom. I think that definition of freedom is actually preventing us from living freely, from feeling the sense of freedom that we want to feel. And why is that? Let me give you an example from my own life. And if you've ever been, or if you're currently in a similar situation that I used to be in, I think this will resonate with you. From 2020 to 2024, for 4 years, I was unemployed, I was single, I was childless, I didn't have any major responsibilities. I was living with my parents. I was technically free, right? I was theoretically free to do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, however I wanted. So do you think I was free? Do you think I had freedom? Quite the opposite. I was depressed. I was feeling very stuck. I was anxious. I was feeling hopeless about my future. I felt out of control. And what did I do during those 4 years? I was distracting myself with house chores, cleaning, cooking. I was distracting myself with video games and webcomics and YouTube videos and a variety of different entertaining websites and apps and all that. All I was doing for 4 years was distracting myself. Now, if I was theoretically free for 4 years, why wasn't I actually free? Why didn't I actually feel the freedom that I had? I didn't feel free because my definition of freedom wasn't helping me actually be free. What was I actually doing with my freedom? What I was actually doing with my freedom was indulging in addictions. What I was actually doing with my freedom was avoiding all the responsibilities, all the possible pain and discomfort and uncertainty I would feel if I actually held myself accountable and actually acted on my responsibilities and actually set goals for myself and implemented them. I was actually trying to avoid all the things that were necessary for my progress, for my growth, for my happiness, for my satisfaction, my fulfillment. So the freedom I aligned myself with, the freedom that I was actually living by, was just indulging in my addictions and indulging in avoidance. And ironically, that freedom didn't give me a sense of freedom. That freedom kept me stuck. That freedom kept me depressed. That freedom kept me miserable and hopeless. That freedom kept me feeling a lack of control over my life. I didn't feel like I had control over my actions, my mind, my behavior. I didn't feel in control at all. The habitual brain, the addicted brain, always tricks you into thinking indulging in the addiction is freedom. But what do you actually feel after you indulge in that? After I play video games for hours, after I read webcomics, after I distract myself with YouTube videos or any other on-screen entertainment, right? I don't feel a sense of freedom. I still feel stuck. So there's a conflict of interest going on in our brain. On one hand, we have certain desires to better our lives, to be of service to humanity, to make a positive impact on the world, to help people, to travel, to try new things, to have beautiful experiences, to make new friends. And there's another side of our brain which views those desires as restriction, that views those desires as discipline and pain and uncertainty and responsibility and accountability, and views freedom in a different way, that views freedom as indulging in bad habits and addictions. After we indulge in our addiction, we usually feel shame and guilt for indulging in the addiction, right? And we feel out of control. We feel stuck. So if indulging in our addictions is actually the opposite of freedom, then what is freedom? How should we actually define freedom? We should actually define freedom as being in control of our behaviors and actions and attitude and mind. How we should actually define freedom is that sense of control, right? Do you feel in control of your life, your actions, your behaviors, your mind, your thoughts? Do you feel in control? If you feel in control, you would probably feel more free, right? You would probably feel more satisfied and fulfilled and content because you get to choose what you act on. You get to choose what you think. You get to choose your attitude, your behavior, your habits, your actions, right? You get to choose how you live your life. So we should define freedom as being in control. Because a lack of control means your freedom was taken away from you. When someone else controls us, we feel a lack of freedom. So that means when we're in control of ourselves and when we're in control of our own lives, we're able to be free. We're able to act on our own free will, right? With this new definition of freedom, we can sort of start to see how it relates to discipline, how discipline would help us, right? What would our goals be? What is the vision for our life now? All of our higher desires, all of our dreams, require full control. They require control of our actions and behaviors. And what does that imply? That implies discipline, right? Achieving your dreams, achieving a better life, changing your life for the better implies discipline. You cannot be free without some sort of discipline. If you want to have control over your life, that requires you to be disciplined and to create some sort of schedule for yourself, some sort of map for yourself to achieve your goals, right? If you think about it, if you want to get from point A to point B, and you're in full control of how you get to point B, right? You would probably choose the shortest way to get there. If your definition of freedom is doing whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want, and if you're actually living by the definition of freedom of indulging in bad habits and addictions, this straight line might feel very restrictive. This straight line might feel like pressure, like pain, like discomfort. It feels forceful. I don't want to feel like I'm forced to go from point A to point B. I want to be able to go anywhere I want. I don't want to be restricted to just point B. Look at all these different destinations I can reach. Look at all the possible directions I can go in. Why should I restrict myself to a straight line going from A to B? But in reality, you're not going anywhere. Your theoretical sense of freedom, looking at all this potential, looking at all the different directions and destinations you can head in, do you actually head in any direction? Do you actually explore any of the possibilities and potentials? Do you actually experience that freedom that you see? Do you actually experience freedom? Do you actually feel free? Or do you keep yourself stuck at point A? Do you keep yourself stuck in point A, always doing point A things, always indulging in addictions and bad habits? You say you want freedom, but what you want isn't all this potential. What you want isn't all the possibilities. What you want is to get from point A to point B. And that requires discipline. That requires a certain amount of pressure and necessity and accountability and taking on responsibility. Freedom means being on the line between A and B and taking a step towards B every single day. Sure, there's lots of potential and different possibilities. But if you don't have a direction, you're stuck at A. And being stuck at A is the opposite of freedom. There is no sense of fulfillment and satisfaction and contentment and joy and freedom that you can feel from being stuck at point A, looking out into the vast potential of possibilities. So when we want to change our lives for the better, we have to increase our level of awareness, we have to increase our level of consciousness, and be intentional in every moment. We have to create the vision for what we want our lives to look like, what our perfect day looks like. We have to set proper goals and challenges for ourselves. We have to reverse engineer our desired life into actionable steps we can take every day, right? We have to figure out what steps we need to take every single day to head in the right direction to reach point B, our desired life, our dream lifestyle, right? And so whenever we feel distracted, whenever we feel like indulging in bad habits or addictions, whenever we feel like doing something other than the steps we have to take, we have to be aware of that and ask ourselves, is this freedom or is this addiction? Is the thing we want to do right now actually freedom? Do we feel in control or do we feel out of control? A part of me felt very restricted, and I felt like I was forcing myself too much to work. And the discipline felt very restrictive. The discipline that I had to live by felt very overwhelming. It felt like too much pressure, and I was trying to avoid that discipline, and I was feeling very distracted. And the restrictions that I had put on my phone with like app timers, they weren't working because I was still distracting myself with, entertaining apps. I was still distracting myself by watching YouTube videos. So the restrictions I had put on my phone use wasn't really helping. Realizing that my definition of freedom was unhelpful Realizing that my definition of freedom was actually just indulging in addictions helped me realize why I was getting distracted, and it also helped me realize how I can reduce distractions as much as possible. I realized that the restrictions I put on my phone weren't enough for me. Um, I still want to indulge in my addictions, but I don't want my addictions to prevent me from doing the work I need to do during the day. So instead of the app timers that I used to use, today I implemented a restriction on my phone in a different way. Unfortunately, previously I was trying to do app timers by restricting my entertaining apps to like 1.5 hours total usage, but I would still end up distracting myself with those entertaining apps during my work hours. So having an app timer like that isn't helpful. You have to restrict your app use to a certain time window. If you're like me and you want to continue indulging in a certain addiction, then all you have to do is restrict that addiction to a certain time frame and implement as many, use as many tools as required to restrict yourself from indulging in that addiction during your work hours, so that at least you get all the work that you need to do done before you indulge in your addiction. So try to create a balance like that. If you don't want to indulge in your addiction, if you want to completely remove that addiction from your life, if that addiction is really debilitating and preventing you from enjoying your life and you just want to get rid of it, then I think it really depends on what the addiction is. If it's like a substance addiction, alcohol, drugs, things like that, you might want to speak with a professional first. Cutting cold turkey could be dangerous and harmful for some substances. Please speak with a professional, doctor, psychiatrist, psychologist first before attempting anything. But if there is no physical harm or danger or risk to cutting your addiction cold turkey, like if it's just a screen addiction or a certain activity, then find ways to cut it out of your life completely, right? If you want to be free from a certain type of screen addiction, then you might have to uninstall certain apps. You might have to use Chrome extensions or certain tools on your laptop to restrict yourself from accessing certain websites, or completely getting rid of your phone, getting a dummy phone, or cutting off your Wi-Fi after a certain time. I don't know what your solution would be, but there's a lot of different solutions. Essentially, if you're feeling stuck, if you're feeling hopeless and out of control, if you feel like whatever you do, you're not able to live the sort of life that you want to live, if you feel like your desired life and lifestyle is out of reach, then you really have to reflect on what your definition of freedom is and increase your level of awareness and consciousness to really think about whether the action you're taking right now is from a place of control or from a place of lack of control. We have to intentionally choose each action that we take, and we have to be in control of every action, every behavior, every thought that we have, so that we can feel in control of our lives to the extent that we can control. Not everything is in our control. We also have to think of what we can actually control, what is actually out of our control, and only focus on things that we can actually control, which is our actions, our behaviors, our reactions, and our thoughts. And that will lead to a greater sense of freedom, a greater sense of satisfaction and contentment and joy and overall happiness. And unfortunately, that requires facing our responsibilities, taking accountability, facing our fears, accepting the pain and discomfort and uncertainty that comes with being disciplined, taking on our life tasks, and living a proper life. So, discipline is a natural and integral part of the equation when it comes to the true definition of freedom. So, if you're avoiding discipline, you're probably also avoiding freedom. So, if you're avoiding discipline, if you're avoiding pain, if you're avoiding responsibility, if you're avoiding taking accountability, you're probably also avoiding feeling a sense of freedom. Freedom implies being okay, accepting the pain, the discomfort, the uncertainty, the responsibility, and the accountability that you need to take on your journey from point A to point B. Right? So that's all I have for now. Just because I realized what the definition of freedom should be doesn't mean I'm an expert on it now. I still struggle with distractions, and I still struggle with avoidance. But I've come to this realization that my definition of freedom is actually preventing me from being free. And after thinking a little bit, I've come to realize what my definition of freedom should be and how that relates to discipline and taking accountability and, evaluating myself on a day-to-day basis and implementing the steps that I need to implement to achieve my goals. So, yeah, that's all I have for now. Please let me know what you think. If you have any tips or tricks that you implement in your own life to reduce or eliminate distractions and be more disciplined, then please let us know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel and checking out my other videos. I would very much appreciate that. Yeah, and thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Take care. Bye.